On April 21st, 2016, at 9:43 in the morning, a Carver County Sheriff's deputy walked through the front doors of Paisley Park. The call had come in as an unresponsive male. What they found inside would set off a legal battle that still hasn't entirely resolved itself today. Nearly 9 years later, Prince Rogers Nelson was lying in an elevator. He was 57 years old, and in that moment, one of the most valuable estates in modern music history became something else entirely. An inheritance without a map, a fortune without instruction, a family without clarity. Because Prince had never written a will, when news broke, the world mourned a genius. But inside the sealed conference rooms of Minneapolis law firms, something darker was already beginning. Within hours, people started coming forward. Some claimed to be siblings. Others claimed to be children. One woman said she was his wife. Another said she'd been promised everything. Bank accounts were frozen, properties were sealed, and a single question hung over everything. Who actually had the right to Prince's empire? What followed wasn't just a legal case. It was a slow disintegration of privacy, legacy, and family. Because when there's no will, the state decides. And when the state decides, everyone becomes a contestant in a game no one wanted to play. This is the story of how an inheritance can become a nightmare, even when there's no villain. Just absence. Just silence. Just one decision that was never made. Let's go back to the beginning. Asterisk. Asterisk. The Purple Throne. Asterisk. Asterisk. Prince Rogers Nelson was born in Minneapolis, Minnesota in 19... His father, John L. Nelson, was a jazz pianist who performed under the name Prince Rogers. His mother, Mattie Della, was a singer. Music wasn't just in the house. It was the house. Prince was named after his father's stage persona, and from the moment he could reach a piano, it was clear he wasn't just talented, he was different. By age 7, he'd written his first song. By 13, he'd formed his first band. By 19, he'd signed his first record deal, and he did it on terms almost no artist had ever secured. He wanted complete creative control. He got it. His debut album, For You, dropped in 19... He played every instrument, all 27 of them. Then came 1999. Then Controversy. Then Purple Rain. By 1984, Prince wasn't just a musician. He was a cultural singularity. Purple Rain sold 13 million copies in the United States alone. The film of the same name brought in $70 million at the box office. He was selling out arenas, rewriting the rules of gender, sound, and performance. He became one of the best-selling artists of all time, moving over 100 million records worldwide. But Prince didn't just make music, he controlled it. Obsessively. He fought his label, Warner Brothers, for ownership of his masters. He changed his name to an unpronounceable symbol just to break free from his contract. He called himself a slave to the industry, appearing in public with the word slave written on his cheek. It wasn't rebellion for show. It was principle. He believed artists should own their work, and eventually, he won. By the 2000s, Prince owned his master recordings. He owned Paisley Park, his sprawling compound and studio in Chanhassen, Minnesota. He owned the rights to most of his catalog. He was worth, by conservative estimates, somewhere between $200 million and $300 million. But wealth wasn't his focus. Legacy was. He recorded obsessively. Thousands of unreleased tracks sat in a vault beneath Paisley Park. Some estimates said there were enough finished songs to release an album a year for a century. He gave music away. He performed surprise shows. He poured money into projects that mattered to him, not to markets. He was private, eccentric, guarded. He didn't do drugs, at least not recreationally. He was a Jehovah's Witness. He believed in discipline, artistry, and control. And yet, he never wrote a will. Asterisk, asterisk. The family he left behind, asterisk, asterisk. Prince's family tree was complicated long before his death. His parents divorced when he was 10. He moved between households, never quite settling. His relationship with his father was strained but artistically reverent. His relationship with his mother was warmer, but distant in his later years. Mattie Della died in 2013. John L. Nelson had died in 2001. By the time Prince passed, both his parents were gone. He had been married twice. First to Mike Garcia, a dancer and singer. They had a son together, boy Gregory, born in 19. The child had Pfeiffer syndrome, a rare genetic disorder. He died a week after birth. The marriage didn't survive the grief. They divorced in 2000. In 2001, Prince married Manuela Testolini, a businesswoman and philanthropist. That marriage lasted 5 years. They divorced in 2006. No children. Both women remained on relatively good terms with him, but neither had legal claims to his estate under Minnesota law. Prince had siblings, but the relationships were tangled. His full sister, Tika Nelson, was the only surviving child from both John and Mattie. She was a singer too, though she never reached Prince's level of fame. They were close in childhood, distant in adulthood, and reconnected in his final years. Tika struggled with addiction for much of her life. Prince helped her financially, quietly. He didn't publicize it. Then there were the half-siblings. Prince's father had children from other relationships. Sharon Nelson, Noreen Nelson, and John R. Nelson were his half-siblings from his father's side. Prince barely knew them growing up. They had different mothers, different lives. Sharon worked in social services. Noreen worked in corrections. Jonah had a quieter life. None of them were in the music industry. None of them had regular contact with Prince. There was also Omar Baker, a half-brother on his mother's side. Same situation. Distant. Occasional contact, but not close. So when Prince died, his immediate family consisted of one full sister and 5 half-siblings. None of them wealthy. None of them expecting anything. Because for all his success, Prince had never talked to them about money. He never talked to anyone about money. Not his lawyers. Not his financial advisors. Not his closest friends. He just worked, and when he died, he left behind a kingdom with no heir. Asterisk, asterisk. The first 72 hours. Asterisk, asterisk. The morning Prince's body was discovered. Chaos was still distant. Shock was immediate. Grief was global, but inside Paisley Park, the machinery of death had already started turning. Carver County authorities secured the property. The medical examiner's office took possession of the body. An autopsy was scheduled. Toxicology reports would take weeks. In the meantime, Prince's inner circle, his management, his lawyers, scrambled to figure out what came next. Paisley Park wasn't just a studio. It was a business. Prince employed dozens of people. Security, sound engineers, archivists, assistants. Payroll was due. Bills were stacking, and no one knew who had the authority to pay them. Within 48 hours, Bremer Trust, a wealth management firm in Minnesota, filed an emergency petition with the Carver County District Court. They requested to be named special administrator of Prince's estate. Their argument was simple. Someone needs to manage this immediately, or it will collapse. The court agreed. On April 26, just 5 days after his death, Brima Truss was granted temporary control. That same week, Tika Nelson, Prince's full sister, filed her own petition. She claimed she'd searched Paisley Park and Prince's other properties. She found no will, no trust, no estate plan of any kind. Under Minnesota law, if someone dies without a will, it's called dying an intestate. Succession laws are brutally clear. The estate goes to the closest surviving relatives in a specific order. Spouse, children, parents, siblings. Prince had no surviving spouse, no surviving children, no surviving parents. That left siblings. Tika's filing set everything in motion, because once it became public that Prince had no will, people started crawling out of the walls. Asterisk. The claimants arrive asterisk. By the end of the first week, the Carver County Courthouse had received multiple claims to Prince's estate. Some were expected, others were not. Tika Nelson was the first. As his full sister, she had the strongest claim under Minnesota law. But she didn't want to fight. She just wanted clarity. Her filing was administrative, practical. She hired a lawyer, but she wasn't waging war. Not yet. Then came the half-siblings. Sharon Nelson filed. Nora Nelson filed. John Ere Nelson filed. Omar Baker filed. Each of them claimed a share. Under interstate law, half-siblings received the same inheritance as full siblings in Minnesota. That meant if Tika got 1/6, they each got 1/6 too. But that was just the beginning. A woman named Carlin Q. Williams filed a claim stating she was Prince's niece and should inherit as a descendant of a deceased sibling. That claim was later withdrawn, but it signaled something important. This wasn't going to be simple. Then came the surprise. A man named Carlin Q. Williams, a different person, filed claiming to be Prince's son. He said his mother had a relationship with Prince in the 80s. He provided no DNA evidence. Not yet, but the claim was formally submitted, and under probate law, it had to be investigated. Then another man came forward. Prison inmate, Carlin Q. Williams. Yes, another Carlin Q. Williams. He also claimed to be Prince's son. His claim was swiftly dismissed, but it revealed something ugly. People were starting to see Prince's estate as a lottery ticket. Within 2 months, more than 45 people had contacted the court or Bremer Trust, claiming some biological or legal connection to Prince. Some said they were secret children. Some said they were owed money for work they'd done. Some claimed Prince had verbally promised them things. One woman claimed to be his wife, based on a common-law marriage argument. Another claimed she'd been engaged to him. Most of these claims were dismissed outright, but 6 were taken seriously. 6 people claimed to be Prince's biological children, and each one required DNA testing, legal review, and months of investigation. This is where the story stops being about grief and starts being about something darker. If stories like this interest you, subscribing helps you catch the next one. Asterisk. The Vold. Asterisk. While the claimants fought, something else was happening behind closed doors. Bremer Truss, now in control of Paisley Park, had discovered the vault. It was legendary among Prince fans. He'd talked about it vaguely in interviews. A climate-controlled archive beneath Paisley Park filled with unreleased music. Thousands of recordings, entire albums that had never seen light. Video footage, handwritten lyrics, rare mixes. The mythology suggested it was one of the most valuable music archives in existence, but no one outside Prince's innermost circle knew what was actually inside. And Prince hadn't left instructions. Brimmer Truss brought in archivists, audio engineers, and intellectual property lawyers. What they found was staggering. Entire albums fully mixed and mastered, just sitting there. Songs recorded with Miles Davis, with Stevie Wonder, with artists who were now dead. Live recordings from legendary sessions, film reels from private concerts, mountains of it, unsorted, uncatalogued, unmarked. The estate was valued initially at $200 million, but experts started to whisper that the vault alone could be worth hundreds of millions more. Some estimates pushed the total estate value to over $500 million, maybe higher, depending on how the music was released. This changed everything, because now the inheritance wasn't just about what Prince left behind. It was about what he never released and who controlled it. Asterisk. Asterisk. The music industry moves in asterisk. Asterisk. By summer 2016, every major music company wanted a piece. Sony, Winnie, Universal, Warner Brothers, Prince's old adversary, independent labels, streaming platforms. They all reached out to Bremer Trust with offers. Some wanted distribution rights. Some wanted publishing. Some wanted the whole catalog. But there was a problem. Without a clear heir, no one could make binding decisions. Bremer Trust could maintain the estate, pay bills, and preserve assets, but they couldn't sell anything significant without court approval, and the court wouldn't approve anything until the inheritance was settled. So the estate was frozen, making money, barely, losing value in some ways because the longer Prince's music wasn't being actively released and managed, the more cultural momentum it lost. And the siblings, the ones who actually stood to inherit, had no power. They could object. They could file motions, but they couldn't access a dollar. This is when the psychological fracture began. Asterisk. Asterisk. The family fracture. Asterisk. Asterisk. Tika Nelson wanted to settle quickly. She hired an attorney, but her position was clear. Divide the estate equally among the siblings. Follow the law. Move on. She said publicly that she wasn't interested in fighting. She just wanted her brother's wishes honored, even though he'd never stated any wishes. But Sharon Nelson, her half-sister, had a different perspective. Sharon was older. She'd grown up with their father, John L. Nelson, in a different household. She barely knew Prince until they were adults, but she had memories. She had letters he'd sent her. She felt she had as much right to his legacy as anyone. Sharon hired her own lawyer. So did Norrin. So did John R. So did Omar. By the end of 2016, there were 6 separate legal teams representing the 6 siblings. They weren't enemies yet, but they weren't united. And that's when Bremer Truss made a recommendation that split them down the middle. In December 2016, the trust proposed that Prince's estate be divided into 2 entities. One for music and intellectual property, one for physical assets like Paisley Park and real estate. They suggested bringing in a music entertainment advisor to manage the catalog. The name they proposed was L. Londell Macmillan, an entertainment lawyer who'd worked with Prince in the past. Some siblings agreed, others didn't. Tika supported it. Sharon opposed it. The fracture lines started forming. Then Bremer Truss submitted their fees. For 6 months of work, they billed the estate $1,300,000. Sharon Nelson filed an objection. She argued the fees were excessive. She argued Bremer Trust was dragging out the process to inflate costs. She wanted them removed. The court disagreed. The fees were approved, but the trust was broken. Asterisk. The first settlement offer in early 2017, nearly a year after Prince's death, something strange happened. A man named Alfred Jackson came forward. He was Prince's half-brother. Same mother, Matidella, different father. He'd been estranged from the family for decades. Most of Prince's siblings didn't even know he existed. Alfred was in his 70s. He lived modestly. He wasn't wealthy, and he had no interest in fighting. He just wanted recognition. He wanted to be acknowledged as part of the family. Genetic testing confirmed it. He was Matidella's son. Under Minnesota law, they gave him the same inheritance rights as Omar Baker, another half-sibling on Matty's side. But here's where it got strange. Alfred didn't fight for a full share. Instead, he negotiated directly with the other heirs. He agreed to accept a smaller, fixed payout in exchange for waiving his right to ongoing royalties and estate disputes. The amount was never disclosed publicly, but legal filings suggested it was in the low 7 figures. Tika and some of the other siblings agreed. Sharon opposed it. She argued that every heir should receive an equal share. No exceptions, no shortcuts. She felt this settlement was a precedent that would weaken everyone's position. But the court approved it. Alfred Jackson took his payout and disappeared from the case. It was the first crack. The first time the siblings realized they didn't have to stay united. They could negotiate separately. They could protect their own interests. And once that idea took root, everything accelerated. Asterisk. The DNA tests. Asterisk. By mid-2017. The court had ordered DNA testing for all remaining claimants who said they were Prince's biological children. The process was invasive and public. Each claimant had to provide samples. Each sample was compared against Prince's DNA, which had been preserved during the autopsy. One by one, the results came back. Negative. The woman who said she was his daughter from a secret affair. Not a match. A teenager from Kansas who said his grandmother told him Prince was his father. Not a match. Every single one. Negative. By August 2017, the court formally ruled that Prince had no surviving biological children. That meant the estate would go entirely to his siblings. 6 people. Tika Nelson, Sharon Nelson, Noreen Nelson, John R. Nelson, Omar Baker, and Alfred Jackson. Though Alfred had already settled, so 5 people, each entitled to 1/5 of Prince's estate. Except the estate still wasn't valued. The vault still wasn't catalogued. Paisley Park was still in legal limbo, and the siblings still couldn't agree on how to manage any of it. That's when Comerica Bank entered the picture. Asterisk. The bank takes over asterisk. In February 2018, Bremer Trust stepped aside. They'd done their job. The immediate crisis was over. The estate was stable, but it needed long-term management. And Bremer Trust wasn't built for that. The court appointed Comerica Bank and Trusts as the new estate administrator. Comerica was massive. National. Experienced in managing estates worth hundreds of millions. They had resources Bremer Trust didn't. They had entertainment industry connections. They had a plan, but they also had an agenda. Comerica immediately began negotiating deals that Bremer Trust had avoided. They signed a distribution agreement with Sony Legacy Recordings to release Prince's unreleased music. They signed a publishing agreement with Universal Music Publishing Group for global rights. They announced plans to turn Paisley Park into a permanent museum and event space. The deals were worth tens of millions of dollars. Maybe more, and they started generating revenue, but the siblings weren't seeing any of it. Under Minnesota probate law, the estate had to be fully settled before any distributions could be made. That meant debts had to be paid first. Taxes had to be calculated, and Comerica's fees had to be covered. Sharon Nelson filed another objection. She argued that Comerica was prioritizing corporate partnerships over the heirs' interests. She wanted more transparency. She wanted a seat at the table. Comerica refused. They answered to the court, not to the heirs. And that's when Sharon did something unexpected. She formed an alliance. Asterisk. The alliance asterisk. Sharon reached out to Primary Wave, an independent music publishing and talent management company based in New York. Primary Wave had a reputation for buying up estates and catalogs from aging or deceased artists. They'd worked with Whitney Houston's estate, with Smokey Robinson, with Def Leppard. They knew how to monetize legacy. Sharon and her siblings, Norrin and John R., agreed to sell Primary Wave a portion of their future inheritance. The deal was structured as an advance. Primary Wave would pay them up front, and in exchange, they'd receive a percentage of whatever those siblings eventually inherited. It was a gamble. If the estate ended up being worth less than expected, Primary Wave lost money. If it was worth more, the siblings lost money, but it gave Sharon, Norrin, and John our immediate liquidity, and more importantly, it gave them leverage, because now Primary Wave had a financial interest in the estate, and Primary Wave had lawyers. Aggressive ones. Tika Nelson didn't join the deal. Neither did Omar Baker. They stayed independent. The family was now divided into two camps. 3 siblings with corporate backing. 2 siblings without, and the estate became a battlefield. Asterisk. The tax bomb. Asterisk. In January 2019, nearly 3 years after Prince's death, the Internal Revenue Service filed a formal objection to the estate's tax filings. The IRS claimed the estate had undervalued Prince's assets by more than 50%. Comerica had valued the estate at $82.3 million. The IRS valued it at $163.2 million. The difference, $80 million. And the taxes on that difference came to an additional $32 million in estate tax, plus penalties. The IRS specifically targeted the value of Prince's name, image, and likeness, what's called NIL in estate law. Comerica had valued Prince's nil at $22 million. The IRS said it was worth at least $75 million, maybe more. The fight went to tax court. It dragged on for years, and while it dragged, the estate couldn't make final distributions. The siblings couldn't access their inheritance. Everything was frozen again. Sharon Nelson, backed by Primary Wave's legal team, filed motions arguing that Comerica had intentionally undervalued the estate to minimize their own risk and maximize their management fees. She pointed out that Comerica's fees were calculated as a percentage of estate transactions, which meant the longer the estate stayed open, the more they earned. Comerica denied it. They argued they'd valued the estate conservatively based on the information available at the time. They said the IRS was overreaching. They said the nil valuation was speculative because Prince's earning power was tied to music releases that hadn't happened yet. The court didn't rule immediately. It asked for more documentation, more appraisals, more expert testimony, and the months turned into years. Asterisk. The museum asterisk. While the legal war continued, Comerica pushed forward with the Paisley Park Museum. It opened to the public in October 2016. just 6 months after Prince's death. Tours were offered. Fans could walk through the studios where he recorded. They could see his costumes, his instruments, his awards. They could stand in the room where he died. It was eerie, reverent, profitable. Tickets sold out within hours. The museum brought in millions in revenue during its first year. Comerica called it a tribute. Sharon called it exploitation. She argued that turning Paisley Park into a tourist attraction was exactly what Prince would have hated. He was private. He controlled access to his space obsessively. He never let cameras inside unless he approved every shot, and now people were paying to walk through his home. But Taika disagreed. She said the museum honored his legacy. She said it let fans feel close to him. She attended the opening. She gave interviews supporting it. The family was splitting not just over money, but over memory, over what Prince would have wanted. And no one actually knew, because he'd never said. Asterisk. The unreleased music asterisk. Asterisk in 2019, Comerica and Sony began releasing music from the vault. The first album was Piano and a Microphone, 1983, a collection of raw solo recordings. It was intimate, striped, down, beautiful. It sold well. Then came Originals, an album of Prince's demo versions of songs he'd written for other artists. Then Sino, the Times Deluxe then more live albums, then more compilations. Each release was carefully curated. Each was marketed as a gift to the fans. Each made money, but the siblings started to wonder how much music was actually in the vault, and how long could Comerica keep releasing it. Sharon filed a motion requesting a full inventory. She wanted to know exactly what was down there. How many songs? How many albums? How many recordings? She argued that the heirs had a right to know what they were inheriting before it was all sold off, piece by piece. Comerica resisted. They said a full catalog would take years and cost millions. They said it wasn't necessary. They said the music was being released strategically to maximize value, and that rushing the process would hurt everyone. The court sided with Comerica. Sharon's motion was denied, and that's when the paranoia set in, because if the heirs didn't know what was in the vault, how could they know what was being released? How could they know if anything was being held back? How could they know if Comerica was being honest? They couldn't. They just had to trust, and trust was already gone. Asterisk. The second settlement. Asterisk. Legal fees had climbed past $10 million. Comerica's fees were approaching $5 million. The IRS case was still unresolved, and the siblings were exhausted. Tigga Nelson, now in her 60s, began pushing for a settlement. She was tired. She was sick of fighting. She wanted her share so she could move on with her life. She didn't care about controlling the legacy. She just wanted closure. Omar Baker agreed. He'd been quiet throughout most of the process, but he was ready to settle. Sharon, Noreen, and John R., backed by Primary Wave, wanted to keep fighting. They believed the estate was worth far more than Comerica was claiming. They believed they were being lowballed. They believed that if they held out, they could force a better deal. The court proposed mediation. All parties agreed. They met privately, without the press, without public filings. The details of what was discussed have never been fully disclosed. But in August 2020, a partial agreement was reached. The estate would be divided into separate trusts. One for Tigga and Omar, one for Saran, Noreen, and John R. Each trust would manage its portion independently. Each would receive distributions separately. Each could make its own decisions about licensing, merchandise, and future music releases within certain parameters. It wasn't a clean split. It wasn't what anyone wanted. But it was progress. And then, just as things seemed to be stabilizing, another surprise. Asterisk. Asterisk the business partner. Asterisk asterisk. In late 2020, it was revealed that Prince had, at the time of his death, been negotiating a deal with ROC Nation, Jay-Z's entertainment company. The negotiations were preliminary. Nothing was signed, but the emails, contracts, and meeting notes showed that Prince was considering a partnership that would have given ROC Nation distribution rights to his unreleased music in exchange for a major upfront payment. The emails were dated weeks before his death. ROC Nation never formalized the deal. After Prince died, they stepped back out of respect. But the existence of those negotiations raised a disturbing question. If Prince was planning to monetize the vault himself, why didn't he write a will specifying how? Some interpret it as evidence that he'd been planning to, that he'd just run out of time. Others saw it as proof that he didn't care what happened after he was gone. He was focused on the work, not the legacy. Sharon seized on it. She argued that the ROC Nation emails proved Prince intended to keep creative control, and that Comerica's strategy of licensing everything to Sony went against his wishes. Comerica countered that negotiations aren't intentions, and without a will, wishes are irrelevant. The court agreed with Comerica. The Sony deal stood. But the emotional damage was done. The siblings now believed that even if they won their inheritance, they'd lost Prince's actual legacy. Asterisk. Asterisk the IRS settlement. Asterisk asterisk. In January 2021, nearly 5 years after Prince's death, the IRS case finally settled. The estate and the IRS agreed to a valuation of $156.4 million. Not quite the $163 million the IRS wanted, but far above the $82 million Comerica had claimed. The estate owed an additional $31 million in taxes and penalties. That money had to be paid before any distributions could be made. So Comerica liquidated assets. They sold some real estate. They accelerated music releases. They licensed Prince's image for merchandise. They signed a deal with Netflix for a documentary. Everything was being sold, piece by piece, and the siblings watched as the thing they were inheriting shrank. By the time the IRS was paid, the net estate had dropped to around $125 million, split 5 ways. That was $25 million per year, before legal fees, before Comerica's fees, before taxes on the distributions themselves. Sharon did the math. After everything, each heir might walk away with $15 million. Maybe less. For Prince's estate. For one of the greatest musicians in history. $15 million. It felt like a theft. Not by any person, but by the system. By time. By the absence of a will. Asterisk asterisk. The first distributions asterisk asterisk in late 2021, the court finally approved initial distributions. Tyka Nelson received her first payment. So did Omar. So did Sharon, Noreen, and John R. Though their payments went partially to Primary Wave as part of their earlier agreement. The amounts weren't disclosed, but legal analysts estimated they were in the range of $3 to $5 million each. Initial payments, not the full inheritance. The estate was still open. More money would come later, as more music was released, as more deals were made. But it was something. After 5.5 years, the siblings finally had money. Tika bought a house. She paid off debts. She funded her own music project, an album she'd been wanting to record for years. She said in an interview that she finally felt like she could breathe. Sharon didn't give interviews. She stayed quiet. She kept fighting. Because to her, this wasn't about the money anymore. It was about principle. About what her brother had deserved. About what the family had lost. And the estate was still open. The legal battles were still ongoing. Comerica was still in control. Asterisk. Asterisk. The final fracture. Asterisk. Asterisk. By 2023, the siblings barely spoke. Tika had stepped back from all estate matters. She'd taken her money and moved on. Omar was the same. Quiet, distant, done. Sharon, Norin, and John kept pushing. They filed motions to remove Comerica. They filed motions to audit the vault. They filed motions to challenge licensing deals. Most were denied. Some were settled quietly. But the fight continued, and then, in March 2023, Primary Wave made a move. They offered to buy out the other heirs' shares. They wanted to consolidate control of the estate. They offered a lump sum payment to Taika and Omar in exchange for their future royalties and decision-making power. Taika considered it. The money was substantial, and she was tired. But before she could decide, another company entered the picture. Sony Music made a counteroffer. They wanted to buy the entire estate outright. All music rights, all publishing, all licensing. They offered north of $200 million. If the siblings agreed, they'd receive a massive payout immediately, but they'd lose all control. Forever. No more decisions, no more royalties, no more say in how Prince's music was used. Sharon refused. She called it a betrayal. She said selling to Sony was exactly what Prince had fought against his entire life. Tika saw it differently. She said, Prince fought for ownership, but he never figured out what to do with it. And now they were stuck managing something none of them understood. The court scheduled the hearing. All heirs had to be present. They hadn't been in the same room in years. Asterisk. Asterisk. The courtroom. Asterisk. Asterisk. The hearing took place in Carver County, Minnesota, in May 2023. 7 years after Prince's death, the heirs sat on opposite sides of the courtroom. Sharon on one side with her lawyers, Taika on the other with hers. Norin and John are in the middle. Omar alone in the back. The judge asked a simple question. Do you want to settle, or do you want to continue? Sharon spoke first. She said she wanted justice. She wanted accountability. She wanted Comerica removed and a new administrator appointed. She wanted a full audit. She wanted transparency. Tika spoke second. She said she wanted peace. She said the fighting had destroyed what was left of their family. She said Prince wouldn't have wanted this. She said it was time to let go. The judge asked if they could agree on anything. Sharon said no. Taika said no. The judge ruled that the estate would remain open. Comerica would remain in control. Future distributions would happen as revenue came in, but no final settlement. No buyout. No resolution. Sharon walked out without speaking to anyone. Taika cried in the hallway. Omar left through a side door, and the inheritance continued. Asterisk. Asterisk. The music keeps coming. Asterisk. Asterisk. Since 2023. Comerica and Sony have continued releasing Prince's unreleased music, albums, singles, remixes, live recordings. Each release is marketed as a treasure. Each is presented as a gift to the fans. But the vault isn't bottomless. Experts estimate that at the current rate of release, the most commercially viable material will be exhausted within 10 years. After that, what's left will be the rough cuts, the experiments, the half-finished ideas. Still valuable, still fascinating, but not platinum records. And when the music runs out, what's left is the brand, the name, the image, the museum, the merchandise, the licensing deals for films, commercials, and video games. Prince becomes a product, not a person, not an artist, a revenue stream. The heirs will continue to receive payments, small ones. Once the major releases are done, enough to be comfortable, not enough to be wealthy, and they'll have no control. Because they never united, because they never agreed. Because Prince never told them what he wanted. Asterisk. Asterisk. The legal fees asterisk. Asterisk. As of 2024, the total legal fees associated with Prince's estate exceed $25 million. Lawyers for Comerica, lawyers for the heirs, lawyers for the IRS, lawyers for the claimants, lawyers for the disputes over licensing, lawyers for the disputes over Paisley Park, lawyers for everything. $25 million. Paid out of the estate, paid out of what the heirs were supposed to inherit. Sharon has said publicly that the legal system failed them, that probate court is designed to protect institutions, not families, that the process is so expensive and so slow that by the time you win, you've lost. Taika hasn't said anything. She doesn't give interviews anymore. She released a statement in 2024 saying she was done with the estate, done with the fighting, and done with the past. Omar never spoke to the press. Norrin and John are settled their remaining disputes with Comerica in late 2024. The terms were confidential, and the estate remains open. Because there's still music to release, still money to make, still decisions to be made. Asterisk. Asterisk. The will that never was. Asterisk, asterisk. After Prince's death, people who knew him were asked the same question over and over. Why didn't he write a will? Some said he was superstitious, that he believed writing a will was inviting death, that as a Jehovah's Witness, he had a complicated relationship with mortality and planning for it. Felt wrong. Others said he was a perfectionist, that he couldn't decide how to divide things fairly, so he didn't divide them at all. Others said he was in denial, that at 57, he didn't think he was going to die, that he thought he had time. And some said he just didn't care, that he believed his music would speak for itself. And what happened to the money didn't matter. But here's what actually happened. In 2016, weeks before his death, Prince met with an estate planning attorney. He scheduled the appointment himself. He asked about setting up a trust. He asked about what would happen to Paisley Park. He asked about the vault. The attorney prepared documents. Prince was supposed to come back and sign them. He never did. He died 3 days before the appointment. So it wasn't that he didn't care. It wasn't that he didn't think about it. He just ran out of time. And that decision, or lack of decision, cost his family years of pain, millions of dollars, and any chance of unity. Asterisk. Asterisk. The aftermath. Asterisk, asterisk, as of today, Prince's estate is still technically open. Comerica remains the administrator. Music releases continue. Paisley Park remains a museum. The siblings receive periodic distributions. but the amounts have gotten smaller as the most valuable assets have been sold or licensed. Sharon Nelson is in her 70s now. She lives quietly in Minnesota. She doesn't talk about Prince publicly anymore. Tika Nelson is in her 60s. She released a gospel album in 2023. She dedicated it to her brother. She said it was the last thing she'd ever say about him. Omar Baker, Nora Nelson, and John, or Nelson, have stayed out of the public eye entirely. The estate is worth less now than it was in 2016, not because the music isn't valuable, but because managing an inheritance is expensive, and when no one agrees, the costs never stop. Prince's legacy endures. His music still plays. His influence still shapes artists, but his family is fractured. His fortune is diminished. And the inheritance he left behind became exactly what he spent his life trying to avoid. Something controlled by corporations, not by him. Asterisk. Asterisk the lesson. Asterisk, asterisk. This isn't a story about greed. It's not a story about bad people. Sharon wasn't wrong for fighting. Tika wasn't wrong for wanting peace. They were both trying to honor their brother in the only ways they knew how. This is a story about absence, about the vacuum that forms when someone doesn't make a choice. Because when you don't decide, someone else decides for you. And it's never who you'd want. Prince's estate could have been different. If he'd signed those documents, if he'd written a will, if he'd left instructions, his siblings could have inherited cleanly. The vault could have been managed according to his vision. Paisley Park could have been whatever he wanted it to be. Instead, the state decided. Strangers decided. Lawyers decided. And the thing he built, the empire he controlled so carefully, slipped away the moment he died. Estates don't destroy families. Silence does. Ambiguity does. The assumption that this time, and Prince's inheritance, one of the most valuable in modern music history, became one of the most painful, not because of what it was worth, but because of what it cost. The siblings will never be close again. The money will run out, eventually, and when it does, what they'll have left is the knowledge that their brother loved them enough to support them in life, but not enough to protect them in death. And that's the nightmare. Not ghosts, not betrayal, just the slow realization that the person you loved didn't plan for you, didn't think about you, didn't imagine that the thing they built would become a war you'd have to fight. Prince left behind a kingdom, but he didn't leave behind a map, and his family is still lost.